In just 47 seconds, $2.8 billion in EU Black Sea infrastructure funding disappeared into a geopolitical black hole. Ursula von der Leyen didn't wait for parliamentary approval. She activated Article 42.7 of the Lisbon Treaty and declared a maritime emergency. The cameras captured everything. The European Commission went into crisis mode. What did Putin reveal about EU naval weakness that forced the most powerful woman in Brussels to gamble her entire political legacy on a single desperate counterattack? I'm standing in the Berlaymont building corridors where silence is deafening. 3 hours ago, this place buzzed with institutional confidence. Now it feels like a bunker under siege. The crisis began at exactly 09:14 Central European Time when Russian naval forces executed what analysts call the most audacious maritime power play since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Putin didn't invade. He didn't fire a shot. He moved 47 warships into a formation that turned the Black Sea into a Russian lake. The precision was terrifying. Within 4 hours, every commercial shipping lane between Odessa and Constanta was under direct Russian surveillance. Economic implications hit Brussels like a freight train. The EU's Grain Corridor Initiative, worth $2.8 billion in agricultural trade guarantees, became worthless overnight. Ukrainian wheat exports, Romanian oil shipments, Bulgarian port logistics, everything ground to a halt. Insurance companies immediately canceled coverage for any vessel attempting to cross what they now classified as a high-risk war zone. But the real shock came when Putin's foreign ministry released a document titled Maritime Security Clarification. The language was diplomatic, almost polite. Russia was ensuring safe passage for its energy projects. No threats were made. Moscow was protecting its legitimate commercial interests in international waters. Von der Leyen realized she was facing a chess master who had declared checkmate in 5 moves. The EU spent months negotiating complex trade agreements, energy partnerships, and security guarantees for Black Sea nations. Putin rendered every agreement meaningless with a naval deployment that was technically legal under international maritime law. I witnessed the emergency session that followed. Von der Leyen entered the Commission meeting room at 14:22. Her face controlled fury. She had spent her career building European strategic autonomy. Putin had exposed it as expensive fantasy. The documents she carried told the story of institutional humiliation. The first file contained satellite imagery showing Russian naval positions forming what military experts called a maritime noose. Every major shipping route was under direct observation by Russian destroyers and submarines. The second document was even more damaging. A leaked assessment from NATO command confirming that European naval forces in the region were operationally insignificant compared to the Russian deployment. Foreign ministers from Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland were already demanding explanations. How could the EU guarantee their security when Russian warships were patrolling their commercial lifelines? The questions weren't just diplomatic, they were existential. If Brussels couldn't protect basic trade routes, what was the point of European Union membership? Von der Leyen's response was swift and desperate. She announced the activation of Article 42.7, the mutual defense clause that had never been used in EU history. The decision bypassed normal parliamentary procedures and committed European taxpayers to an open-ended military engagement without democratic oversight. The financial commitment was staggering. $15 billion in emergency defense spending authorized through executive decree. But Putin had anticipated this exact response. Within minutes of the EU announcement, Russian media released intercepted communications between Commission officials discussing the urgent need to appear strong regardless of actual capacity. The leak was devastating. Brussels was exposed as an institution that prioritized political theater over strategic substance. The room atmosphere during the emergency session was unlike anything I've witnessed in 15 years covering EU politics. Normally, Commission meetings follow predictable bureaucratic scripts. This felt like watching controlled demolition. Every assumption about European power was collapsing in real time. Josep Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, was seen frantically checking his secure phone every 30 seconds. His hands were visibly shaking as he scrolled through intelligence briefings. The military assessment was unambiguous. Europe lacked the naval capacity to challenge Russian control of the Black Sea. Any direct confrontation would result in immediate and humiliating defeat. Von der Leyen's staff was in constant communication with Washington, begging for American naval support. The responses they received were reportedly non-committal and focused on diplomatic solutions. Translation: the United States was not willing to risk a direct military confrontation with Russia to save European pride. The economic cascade began immediately. Shipping insurance rates for Black Sea routes increased 400% within hours. Romanian port authorities reported major grain exporters canceling contracts and seeking Mediterranean alternatives, adding weeks to delivery times and billions to costs. Bulgaria quietly began emergency negotiations with Russian energy companies to ensure gas supplies. What terrified European leaders wasn't just the immediate economic impact. Putin had demonstrated that Russian naval power could strangle European trade whenever Moscow decided it was necessary. The Black Sea had become a strategic choke point under permanent Russian control. Social media exploded with analysis. Black Sea crisis trended across European capitals within minutes. Twitter was flooded with satellite images showing overwhelming disparity between Russian and European naval forces. TikTok videos comparing EU military spending to actual capacity went viral among Europeans who realized their continent was weaker than taught. The political fallout was immediate and brutal. Right-wing parties across Eastern Europe used the crisis to attack the entire concept of European integration. If Brussels couldn't protect basic commercial routes, they argued, national governments needed to pursue independent security arrangements. The Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, was among the first to publicly suggest that EU members should consider bilateral agreements with Russia rather than rely on ineffective Brussels bureaucracy. Putin's strategy was becoming clear. He wasn't trying to conquer European territory. He was systematically destroying European confidence in their own institutions. Every crisis revealed the gap between EU rhetoric and actual capability. The Black Sea deployment was just the latest demonstration of Russian strategic superiority over European institutional paralysis. Von der Leyen found herself trapped between impossible choices. Escalating the confrontation risked military defeat and political humiliation. Backing down would confirm Putin's narrative that Europe was weak and divided. Either path led to the same destination: diminished European influence and increased Russian dominance over regional affairs. The markets responded with brutal honesty. European defense stocks plummeted as investors realized that EU military spending was focused on bureaucracy rather than actual combat capability. Energy prices spiked across the continent as traders priced in the possibility of Russian retaliation against European infrastructure. The euro weakened against both the dollar and the ruble as currency markets lost confidence in European economic stability. Intelligence sources confirmed Putin's naval deployment was part of a larger strategy to fragment European unity. By creating a crisis exposing EU military weakness, Moscow encouraged individual states to pursue separate accommodations with Russia. The strategy was working. Several Eastern European governments quietly explored bilateral security arrangements, bypassing Brussels entirely. The human cost was already mounting. Ukrainian grain exports, essential for preventing famine in parts of Africa and Asia, were effectively blocked. European companies with commercial interests in the Black Sea faced impossible insurance costs and canceled contracts. Romanian and Bulgarian fishing industries found themselves locked out of traditional waters by Russian naval patrols. Von der Leyen's public response attempted to project confidence while privately acknowledging strategic defeat. Her statement emphasized European unity and determination while carefully avoiding any specific commitments to military action. The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the fundamental reality. Putin had outmaneuvered the entire European security apparatus with a single naval deployment. The crisis exposed the central contradiction of European foreign policy. Brussels had spent decades building an elaborate diplomatic and economic architecture while neglecting the military capacity necessary to defend European interests. Putin had identified this weakness and exploited it with surgical precision. As I write this, emergency meetings continue throughout the Berlaymont building. Von der Leyen's staff is desperately searching for a response that doesn't involve military confrontation or political capitulation. The options are narrowing rapidly. European leaders who spent years criticizing American military dominance suddenly found themselves begging for American protection against Russian aggression. The ultimate question facing Europe tonight is whether the European Union can survive as a geopolitical actor when its fundamental weakness has been exposed so dramatically. Putin's Black Sea Gambit wasn't just a military operation, it was a demonstration that European institutions lack the capacity to protect European interests when challenged by a determined adversary. The era of European strategic autonomy died in the Black Sea today. What emerges from this crisis will determine whether Europe becomes a Russian satellite or accepts permanent dependence on American military power. Von der Leyen's struggle for control reflects a continent struggling to maintain relevance in a world where power flows from military strength rather than diplomatic sophistication. The silence in Brussels tonight speaks louder than any official statement. European leaders know they've been outplayed by a master strategist who understands that true power comes from the ability to impose consequences, not the ability to issue strongly worded statements.